Hello everyone, and welcome to my News Update Soaps 24 official channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. At the Newman ranch, tension continued to simmer after Victor displayed the photo proving Lily and the twins were safe, but that didn't stop the unease spreading through the family. Nikki studied the image carefully, searching for any hint that something was wrong, while Victor remained firm in his belief that he had complete control over the situation. Victoria, however, wasn't as convinced as her father that everything would unfold exactly as he planned. As she watched Victor boast about how Kane would fold, she quietly exchanged a look with Adam and Nick, a silent signal that she was already considering a backup plan. Victor's confidence had always been both his greatest strength and his biggest weakness, and Victoria knew from experience that when he pushed too hard, the fallout could affect everyone. Later, when the siblings gathered at society, Victoria laid out her thoughts more openly. She explained that relying solely on Victor's strategy was too risky, especially when so many lives and businesses were on the line. Adam listened carefully, intrigued by the idea of undermining Phyllis, while Nick hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of betraying their father's trust. Still, Victoria insisted they had to think about protecting the family as a whole, even if it meant going behind Victor's back. She suggested using Phyllis's obsession with power and control to their advantage, arguing that if they applied enough pressure, she might turn on Kane to save herself. The idea wasn't without risk, but Victoria believed it was better than sitting around waiting for Victor's plan to succeed or fail. Meanwhile, at Newman Enterprises, Billy's frustration continued to build as he paced around his office, replaying every conversation he'd had with Kane. Something about the delay in signing the contract didn't sit right with him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being played. Phyllis only made things worse with her smug remarks, pushing his buttons and questioning his authority. Billy snapped back, reminding her that she was only there because Kane allowed it and that she wasn't nearly as important as she thought. But even as he spoke, a seed of doubt crept into his mind. What if Kane really was planning to cut him out? What if the whole deal was just a setup? The more he thought about it, the more uneasy he became, and by the time he poured himself a drink at home later, his nerves were shot. When Phyllis arrived, panicked and insistent that Kane was about to ruin everything, Billy realized the situation was spiraling faster than he'd expected. Across the country in Los Angeles, Claire tried to keep her composure as Holden explained the true reason for his trip. The idea that he was doing a personal favor for Kane didn't sit well with her, especially given everything that was already at stake. Still, she kept her thoughts to herself, choosing instead to focus on the bigger picture. When Holden described the search for Lily and the twins, Claire immediately defended Victor, insisting he wouldn't endanger innocent people just to win a business deal. Holden wasn't so sure, but he didn't argue, instead heading off to meet with the private investigator. Once he was gone, Claire's mind turned to her own secret mission. The phone call to the art gallery owner was carefully planned, every word chosen to avoid suspicion. She pretended to be casually searching for information about a previous owner, but in reality, she was digging into Audra's past, hoping to uncover something that could expose the truth. The more she learned, the more she realized how dangerous this investigation could become. If Holden discovered what she was doing, it could destroy their fragile alliance. Worse, if Audra found out, the consequences might be even more severe. But Claire couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was wrong, that the secrets tying them all together were about to come to light whether they were ready or not. Back in Genoa City, Victor summoned his children to the ranch, determined to show them that his plan was working. When Victoria, Adam, and Nick arrived, they were greeted with the same photo Nikki had seen earlier. Victor presented it like a trophy, proof that he was still the master of every situation. Adam studied the image closely, wondering how far Victor had gone to stage the entire scenario. Nick remained quiet, clearly torn between trusting his father and worrying about the consequences. Victoria, meanwhile, kept her thoughts carefully hidden. She nodded along with Victor's confidence, but inside, her doubts only grew stronger. She knew Victor's tactics often crossed moral lines, and this time, the stakes felt higher than ever. As Victor predicted Kane would soon come crawling back, Victoria Kane, for his part, was feeling the pressure. When Holden called with news about the baseball cap figure leading Lily and the twins away, his heart sank. The fear in their faces on the security footage haunted him, making it impossible to take any chances. Even when Phyllis urged him to call Victor's bluff, Kane refused. The risk was simply too great. He couldn't gamble with Lily and the twins' safety, no matter how tempting it was to fight back. Instead, he made the difficult decision to meet Victor and negotiate. Kane hated the idea of giving in, but he knew protecting his family had to come first. At society, Victoria continued to push her siblings toward her secret plan. She argued that Victor's methods might win the battle but lose the war, especially if they destroyed valuable relationships along the way. Adam found himself drawn to her logic, seeing an opportunity to outmaneuver both Victor and Kane. Nick, however, struggled with the idea of betraying their father. Still, when Victoria mentioned using Phyllis's AI program against her, even Nick had to admit it might work. Phyllis's ambition had always been her weakness, and if they exploited it correctly, she might turn on Kane without realizing she was being manipulated. Meanwhile, Billy's frustration reached a boiling point at home. As he stared into his drink, he thought about everything he'd sacrificed to get this far. The idea of losing Chancellor now felt unbearable. When Phyllis burst in, frantic and desperate, her energy only fueled his anger. She warned him that Kane was about to hand everything over to Victor, and Billy realized he might be running out of time. If he wanted to keep control of Chancellor, he would have to act fast, and maybe even take a few risks of his own. In Los Angeles, Claire's investigation deepened. The gallery owner gave her just enough information to confirm her suspicions about Audra's past. Each new detail painted a picture of someone far more complicated and dangerous than she'd realized. Claire knew she was playing with fire, but she couldn't stop now. The truth was too close, and she needed to know everything before it exploded into the open. Back at the ranch, Victor prepared for his meeting with Kane, convinced the businessman would have no choice but to surrender. Nikki watched him closely, sensing that his confidence bordered on arrogance. She worried that Victor's obsession with winning might cost them more than they realized. Still, she stood by his side, hoping his instincts would prove right once again. When Kane finally arrived, the tension in the room was palpable. He made it clear that he would only agree to Victor's terms if he saw proof that Lily and the twins were safely released. Victor assured him everything would be taken care of, confident that the deal was already his. Kane hated every second of the negotiation, but he knew he was running out of options. As the day drew to a close, the various players prepared for the next phase of the battle. Victoria quietly set her plan in motion, determined to protect her family even if it meant defying Victor. Billy and Phyllis began plotting their own counterattack, while Claire continued her secret investigation into Audra's past. And at the center of it all, Victor remained convinced he was in control. But in Genoa City, control was always an illusion, and the choices made on this day would soon send shockwaves through every corner of the Newman Empire. Night settled over Genoa City, but the tension that had built throughout the day refused to fade. At the Newman ranch, Victor remained in his study long after everyone else had retired to their rooms, the glow of the desk lamp illuminating his determined expression. He studied the contract paperwork Kane was expected to sign, his mind racing with calculations, contingencies, and strategies. For Victor, this was never just about business. It was about legacy, power, and ensuring that the Newman name remained untouchable. Yet even as he reviewed every detail, a small voice in the back of his mind reminded him that the situation was more fragile than he wanted to admit. Nikki entered quietly, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, and found Victor deep in thought. She asked him if he was certain this was the right path, but Victor brushed off her concern with his usual confidence. He insisted everything was under control and that by this time tomorrow, Kane would have no choice but to surrender. Nikki, however, couldn't shake her unease. She had lived through too many of Victor's schemes to believe everything would go exactly as planned. Meanwhile, across town, Victoria sat alone in her office at Newman Enterprises, staring at the city lights through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Her phone rested on the desk in front of her, the screen glowing faintly with a draft message she hadn't yet sent. It was part of her plan to move against Phyllis without Victor's knowledge, and the weight of that decision pressed heavily on her. Victoria knew that going behind her father's back could have serious consequences, but she also believed it was necessary. If Victor's plan failed, the entire family could suffer, and she wasn't willing to let that happen. After a long moment of hesitation, she finally pressed send, setting her secret strategy into motion. At his apartment, Billy paced restlessly, unable to sleep. Phyllis's warning about Kane giving everything to Victor echoed in his mind. He poured another drink but barely touched it, too consumed by the possibility that he was about to lose everything. His thoughts turned to the sacrifices he'd made, the risks he'd taken, and the people he'd pushed away in his pursuit of power. The idea that it might all slip through his fingers because of Victor's maneuvering was almost too much to bear. Billy grabbed his phone, considering whether to call Kane or confront him in person, but he hesitated. He didn't want to show weakness, especially not now. Still, doing nothing felt even worse. Across town, Phyllis was just as restless. She sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by scattered notes and files, her mind racing with possible solutions. She knew Kane's decision to negotiate with Victor could destroy everything they'd built, and she wasn't about to let that happen without a fight. Phyllis began drafting a plan of her own, one that would force Kane to reconsider his options. She didn't care who got hurt in the process, as long as she came out on top. In Los Angeles, Claire sat in her hotel room, the city lights flickering outside her window. The conversation with the gallery owner replayed in her mind, each detail about Audra's past adding another layer of mystery. She opened her laptop and began compiling everything she'd learned, connecting the dots in ways that made her stomach twist. The deeper she dug, the more she realized how dangerous this secret could be, not just for Audra, but for Holden as well. Claire knew she was walking a fine line. If she exposed the truth, it could destroy lives. But if she stayed silent, she might become complicit in whatever dark secret they were hiding. She closed the laptop with a sigh, knowing the decision couldn't be put off much longer. Back in Genoa City, Adam lingered at Society after Victoria and Nick had left, nursing a drink and replaying the day's events in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play, something even Victor hadn't accounted for. Adam had spent most of his life trying to outmaneuver his father, and he recognized the signs of overconfidence when he saw them. Victor believed he had everything under control, but Adam suspected the situation was more volatile than anyone realized. He pulled out his phone and sent a message of his own, reaching out to a contact who might be able to provide some leverage if things went sideways. Adam wasn't sure yet what role he would play in the coming conflict, but he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't going to be caught unprepared. As midnight approached, the various players in this high-stakes game lay awake in different corners of the world, each plotting their next move. Victor remained convinced of his inevitable victory, while Victoria quietly set her alternative plan in motion. Billy and Phyllis prepared to fight back, unwilling to surrender their ambitions. Claire wrestled with the dangerous truth she'd uncovered, and Adam positioned himself for whatever chaos might come next. The stage was set for the next chapter of the battle, and though none of them could see it yet, the choices they made tonight would soon collide in ways that would change everything. Morning light crept slowly over Genoa City, but there was nothing peaceful about the start of the day. At the Newman ranch, the atmosphere felt thick with anticipation. Victor was already dressed in one of his signature dark suits, standing near the fireplace with a cup of coffee in hand as he reviewed the latest messages on his phone. He had slept very little, but that didn't bother him. Victor thrived on moments like this. Moments when the stakes were high and his enemies were about to realize just how outmatched they were. Nikki entered the room, her expression gentle but concerned. She asked if he'd heard from Kane yet, and Victor replied that it was only a matter of time. He was certain Kane would do exactly what he was told. Nikki reminded him that people often surprised him, especially when family was involved. Victor simply smirked and said that was precisely why he'd chosen this strategy. He knew Kane wouldn't risk Lily and the twins. Across town, Billy sat at the kitchen table, staring at his phone as if willing it to ring. He hadn't heard from Kane since the night before, and the silence was driving him crazy. He replayed their last conversation over and over, trying to find some clue about what Kane might do. Billy hated feeling powerless, especially when Victor was involved. He knew how the man operated. Victor didn't just win, he made sure his opponents knew they'd been beaten. Billy's frustration built until he finally grabbed his jacket. He couldn't just sit there waiting. He needed answers, and he was going to get them face to face. Meanwhile, at Newman Enterprises, Victoria arrived early, her heels echoing in the quiet hallway. She headed straight to her office, where her assistant informed her that the call she'd arranged was ready. Victoria closed the door behind her and took a deep breath before answering. On the other end was a tech specialist she trusted implicitly. She asked for an update on the plan to gather evidence against Phyllis and the AI program. The specialist assured her everything was moving forward and that they'd soon have enough information to pressure Phyllis into cooperating. Victoria thanked him and hung up, feeling a mix of determination and anxiety. She hated going behind Victor's back, but she believed it was necessary. If his plan failed, someone had to be ready with a backup. At Society, Nick met Adam for breakfast, though neither of them had much appetite. Nick asked if Adam had slept at all, and Adam admitted he hadn't. The whole situation with Victor and Kane made him uneasy. Adam suggested that their father might be underestimating Kane's desperation. Nick sighed and admitted he'd had the same thought. As much as they both trusted Victor's instincts, they'd also seen his plans backfire before. Nick said he hoped this wouldn't be one of those times. Adam nodded, but the look in his eyes suggested he wasn't nearly as optimistic. Back at the ranch, Victor's phone finally rang. He answered it without hesitation, his voice calm and confident. On the other end was Kane, who sounded tense but composed. Kane said he was ready to talk terms, but he wanted proof that Lily and the twins were safe before signing anything. Victor assured him the proof would come as soon as the deal was finalized. Kane hesitated, clearly torn, but Victor pressed his advantage. He reminded Kane what was at stake and how quickly things could change if he made the wrong decision. After a long pause, Kane agreed to meet Victor in person to finalize everything. When Victor ended the call, he looked at Nikki with a triumphant expression. He told her it was done. Kane was coming to make the deal. Nikki forced a smile, but her worry hadn't disappeared. She knew Victor's victories often came at a cost, and she couldn't shake the feeling that this time might be different. At the same time, Billy arrived at Kane's hotel, only to find that he'd already checked out. The front desk clerk told him Kane had left early that morning. Billy's heart sank as he realized what that meant. Kane was heading straight into Victor's trap, and there might be nothing anyone could do to stop it. In Los Angeles, Claire stood on the balcony of her hotel room, staring out at the city below. Her phone buzzed with a message from the gallery owner, containing an address and a name. It was the lead she'd been waiting for, the key to unlocking Audra's past. Claire knew this was the moment she'd been working toward, but instead of excitement, she felt a wave of dread. Whatever she discovered next could change everything, not just for Audra and Holden, but for herself as well. As the sun climbed higher over Genoa City, the tension continued to build. Victor prepared for what he believed would be his final move. Kane headed toward a confrontation that could alter his future. Billy and Phyllis scrambled to salvage their plans. Victoria quietly advanced her secret strategy, and Claire moved closer to a dangerous truth in Los Angeles. The pieces were all in motion, and by the end of the day, the balance of power in Genoa City might look very different.